There's a formula for prayer that has been created in the New Thought movement that acknowledges, first of all, that we have our own divine connection, our own inner voice to connect to. That we're all part of the sonship, the daughtership. We're all offspring of the Creator. And we're all endowed with the same principles and qualities that we already have within us, what is necessary to know right from wrong, to be guided, and to be able to dream and have the power to back that dream up and have that dream become a reality. So we have a way of praying that isn't about reaching out to a capricious God outside of us, but reaching in to that presence which has always been there, and reaching in positively and affirmatively and specifically and personally, and reaching towards that relationship and allowing ourselves to be guided and to be loved and to be empowered, to be supplied. All of that. So when we pray, it's the kind of prayer that you hear at the opening of this celebration, and when our practitioners pray in the middle, and when we do it at the end. So, well, I have decided that since you're going to be talking about soul currency next week, that you get to have your freedom experience this week. Is everybody okay with having a freedom experience this week? Okay, excellent. See, you can go into this whole holiday with all kinds of wonderful viewpoints. So, whether you say that it was 248 years ago, on July 4th, 1776, or maybe I got the math wrong, but I don't think so. I was going to begin by reading the first stanza or passage from the Declaration of Independence. And then I discovered actually what came before what we commonly hear and think of as the beginning of this document. So here goes. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Some of you obviously have read that or heard that before. That is a statement of purpose that comes right before this one. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we have those rights. We have those rights, and it's very interesting that we are sitting here doing what we're doing because somebody had the guts to say, no, I don't want the kind of God or the religion that the monarchy is saying that I have to have. As a matter of fact, I don't even want a definition of my worth or my value to be that one that has been modeled and handed to me for so long. As a matter of fact, I don't want a definition of who I am and how I should live. And what has value, what has meaning, what counts, and how all of that should be. I don't want to have that handed to me anymore. Ernest Holmes did a wonderful talk about freedom on an occasion such as this back in the 30s. And he said one thing that happened in the early days is that, the Pilgrims and the pioneers secured their freedom, and then from that way of living, and then quickly went back to this tacit agreement, this unspoken, thou shalt believe as I believe business. I'm getting ready to go speak in Vermont next weekend to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship that I was christened in, really. I have a certificate now. And so I've been reading a lot about Emerson, because Ralph Waldo Emerson has a tie with this movement as much as with that one. And reading more about those conquered conversations that Mary Morrissey told us about in Prosperity Plus 2. And discovering things like Nathaniel Hawthorne added the W to his name to distance himself from his father, who was very involved in the Salem witch trials, not in favor of the witches, okay? And all of these really amazing men and women who took this thing to the next level. You know, we know there are 56 men ranging from farmers to land barons and all in between, merchants, teachers, who signed this Declaration of Independence. And then there's this group of people who said, okay, now let's get busy, you know. Let's talk about how we have within us everything we need to know. We don't need a middleman or woman, and I don't consider myself to be that, by the way. We don't need someone else to tell us what it's like to be inspired, to have a revelation, a dream. We don't need someone else to tell us so many of these things. So they took it further, and they were teachers and they were writers, men and women both, idealists. They went on and said, let's get around and talk about this, and let's put it into practice. Let's stand up and be heard. Let's go say things and do things. Let's change things because we know they can be better. And some of them remained quite successful, and others, you know, we revered later on, long after they were gone. Some of them, Mr. Alcott, Bronson Alcott, he was pretty destitute. He was determined to live by his ideals. But one of his daughters, Louisa May Alcott, did very well as a novelist and was able to help, you know, the family with some of those monies. So here's this group of New Englanders who are saying, okay, we came all this way to be free. And, you know, if you read anything about it or watch any documentaries, we still have this human habit, don't we, to bring our old patterns with us, no matter how far we travel. We do it all the time when we leave one spot for another, one relationship for another, one job for another, you know, turn a page in the course of our lives. We bring us with us. Thich Nhat Hanh says, wherever you go, there you are. We're in this class together, a bunch of us doing this, the art and practice of living with nothing and no one against you. And we're doing these worksheets, and there I am again. And again, and again, and again, there I am again. And discovering that so many of these habits of believing are so unconscious and so unmonitored that the very thing that we keep trying to escape, we bring with us. And we initiate it. We start it again and again and again. And the only way to break free from that pattern of repeating what you say you're leaving or escaping is to look in here, is to be a transcendentalist and be one who doesn't just sit around having the conversations. Be one who talks about it, be one who writes about it, be one who does his or her best to live it. I think Nathaniel Hawthorne started some utopian community that lasted like 7 months. Okay, well, so another one of us gives it another shot. I have a friend who's in school right now, finishing her degree, to be part of creating intentional community in a way that works a little better than all of the experiments of the 70s and 80s and 90s and so on. Don't give up. So, in talking about freedom right here today, and I don't know why I still have my glasses on, but I think it has something to do with my reading you some more stuff in a little bit. Ernest Holmes, the founder of this teaching, of course, had some things to say about that as well. When we look at Ernest Holmes, he's part of a group of people who made up what we call the New Thought movement. It developed or blossomed again, let's say that it was reignited by the Transcendentalists. Now, if you compare the timelines of these different teachings, you'll see that way back there are people who said, but God's inside of me, and they got in big trouble. You know, it wasn't pretty. But we kept saying, I know that God is inside of me. We kept saying it, and we brought ourselves somewhere where we could practice saying it and being it. And practice discovering that wherever we go, there we are, and begin again and again and again. And by the way, I put a question out on the minister's listserv, and then I decided I better not read any of the replies because they just confused me. There were just reams of things. You know, the spiritual significance of the Declaration of Independence and so on and so forth. And one thing was that somebody, I almost took the time to differ with them, and I decided that wasn't a good use of my time. Said freedom is not free. And I thought, gee, that doesn't sound like science of mind to me. That doesn't sound like metaphysical principle or truth. In any case, with regard to every brave man and woman who gave his or her life so that we could be here now having this conversation, what I choose to do is to say thank you. What I choose to do is not to sit here and wallow in some view of the past that is full of unresolved pain. To look at it as something I should feel guilty about, because that would be a family origin pattern. But how about to say, wow, in some way, I am here. All of that stuff happened. Humanity seems to take quite a while to evolve. And yet, haven't we? I was sitting here in this meditation. One of the habits that I am addressing is this egoic temptation to be in the past or in the future. And I do mean a habit. My mind sits down and instantly looks at what else and where else. And I have to practice and have the discipline to avail myself of the present. I know that's where the gifts are. I know that's where the goodies are. I know that's where all the possibility is. Infinite possibility isn't in yesterday or tomorrow. It's right here. So Ernest Holmes has something to say about freedom and bondage, and I'm going to get on with sharing that with you. To suppose that the creative intelligence of the universe would create man in bondage and leave him bound would be to dishonor the creative power, which we call God. To suppose that God could make man as an individual without leaving him to discover himself would be to suppose an impossibility. Individuality must be spontaneous. It can never be automatic. The seed of freedom must be planted in the innermost being of man. But, like the prodigal son, man must make the great discovery for himself. He goes on to say, the divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. All instinctively feel this. The truth points to freedom under law. Thus, the inherent nature of man is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. We do well to listen to this inner voice, for it tells us of a life wonderful in its scope, of a love beyond our fondest dreams, and of a freedom which the soul craves. So there are two things that Ernest Holmes says about how we get this freedom. On the one hand, we are told that this gift, the big G gift, all the goodies, have already been given. We say that we have inalienable rights, that we are born free, that all of this stuff is something that each human being everywhere on the planet is entitled to, and in fact already has within him or herself. So the freedom that we're talking about, for example, in the document that we were reading earlier, is simply to become acquainted with that, to be in relationship with it, to explore it, and not with anybody else's idea of how that should be. Well, Ernest Holmes talks about freedom in a metaphysical sense, which would be something that is universal. He talks about the conditions of freedom and the laws of life as the two things that we must know in order to avail ourselves of those gifts and that freedom. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what those are. The conditions of freedom. Something about freedom that's very interesting, which comes from the quote that I just read, is that we are free. But if Spirit made all of our decisions for us, if any one of your parents decided everything for you, how would you develop? Okay? If Spirit does everything for us, then we are not individuals. We are perfect expressions of our Creator's life. But an automatic individuality is impossible. To be real and free, individuality must be created in the image of perfection, and let alone to make the discovery for itself. Excuse me. God cannot do this for us. If it were done for us, we would not be free. Individuality is self-choice and complete freedom to back it up. To think and to dream of that without actually experiencing it is not liberty. That is bondage. To imagine without the power to back it up would be an unrealized dream. That's not free. No, we can sit in our living rooms, we can sit on bar stools, we can sit in discussion groups and talk about freedom. But if we're not having an experience of it, excuse me, will you get me a Kleenex, please? Napkin. It's not the same thing. Thank you. So there are two things. There are the conditions of freedom and the laws of life. We're saying that the conditions of freedom are that we're all free, but if it was handed to us and we didn't discover it by ourselves, then we wouldn't be individuals. And if we're not individuals, we're just robots, and then we're not free, right? So one piece of this equation is that in order to be truly free, we have to discover things for ourselves. The laws of life are what we are discovering. The laws of life, which in that other song and in many passages are referred to as Lord, are those things which govern the interaction of all these parts and pieces, all these aspects of creation, and allow it to move beautifully together. So the laws of life say that what we think and what we feel and what we focus on determine what we get. The laws of life say that we must experience the consequences of whatever it is that we believe. Ernest Holmes says that that same thing that binds us of experiencing the consequences of what we believe is what will free us when we understand it. When we know how that works, then we can make it work for us. We've said this many times. When we know how gravity and aerodynamics work and so many other concepts of engineering, for example, combine, then we can achieve flight. But not until we know those things. So, it's not enough to say, wait a minute, I have a right to think for myself. It's not enough to say, don't tell me how to believe, how to worship. Don't tell me that God had, one offspring, and I have to go through that being in order to, get this thing. Don't tell me I have to go through anyone. Well, that's good stuff. Remember I was telling you about my friend and mentor who said, that's great, so what are you going to do about it? We get to do something about it. Just like that group of transcendentalists did something about it. Just like everyone who's come since has done something about it. But we also know, because of the conditions of freedom and the laws of life, that we can't run forever, and we can't fight forever, and we can't argue forever, we can't protest forever, because what that will do for us is recreate the need for those things. We recreate someone to run from. We recreate enemies to fight with. We recreate something to be mad about. We recreate something to protest. So what happens is that in this New Thought movement, and where we are now in it, we're realizing, gee, I've got this really passionate desire to make a difference in the world, and I'm finally getting that the way that I can do that is by doing my inner work, by going in and duking it out with the ways that I have been believing that were so buried I didn't even know I was doing them. Those subtle things that walk into a room with me and cause things to happen, invite people to behave a certain way, invite all of the circumstances and scenarios to agree with that pattern that I didn't even know I was broadcasting. That's a little bit about how the laws of nature work. So what Ernest Holmes says regarding this freedom, this opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, this thing that we've got, is that yes, it's all there. It's already been given, and the only way that we can get it is by, number one, understanding that the conditions of freedom require us to discover them for ourselves. And number two, that the laws of nature provide the perfect way, the only way for everything to show up. And when we understand them, they work for us. It is when we don't understand them that they seemingly work against us. So we already have this freedom to study that, to discover it, to know it, to get it. And we have every day of our current lives to experiment and to understand the laws of life. I want to give you some examples. My favorite one is when you're in a rush to get out the door. You're in a rush to get out the door, and perhaps if you are a student or a worker who carries their laptop, or a person who carries a briefcase or a handbag or a knapsack or anything and drives an automobile, chances are that you've got to get up, get showered, get dressed, get out the door with everything that you need and get to your place of work or the fulfillment of whatever that commitment is. Do you know how many laws of nature are involved in getting that done? I've shared with many of my other spiritual families on the road that there are a ton of those involved in just the simple process of getting up and getting dressed and showing up where you're supposed to be. When I was much younger, I thought, well, first of all, I thought getting up if it was dark out was just totally unjust, So I spent a lot of time fighting that. As a result, I spent zero time getting acquainted with how long it actually takes to wake up, to shower, to eat something, to get dressed, and so on, I think I defied it so much I also didn't think about how long it would take me to get my homework done. So earlier in my life, I think I was in my late 20s, I would go somewhere to get together with a bunch of people before work and drink like 3 cups of coffee, barely dressed. I haven't calculated the right amount of time I didn't eat. Then I show up at work and I'm in crisis by then, right? Because all I've had is caffeine and no food, and I'm supposed to be present and ready to work, to do something that someone has paid me to do. I used to get speeding tickets on those mornings as well. Another example with trying to get out the door is this idea that you have several natural laws involved. For example, in carrying a cup of coffee or tea, perhaps, and your car keys, one of them you can turn, and you should, your keys to your door, and the other one you're supposed to keep very still and upright. So you've got 2 different needs going on right there. Then you have that bag, the knapsack, or whatever. And I don't know about you, but there are many times when mine slips down onto the arm that's holding, actually, if I'm not thinking carefully, the cup of coffee. I do this a couple times a week, actually, because I go to visit someone where I bring my purse, I bring a bag full of appropriate materials, a lunch container, and that cup of coffee, and I have the keys to my house and my car and the keys to her house. And I have to really be present with each one of those. The thing is that we get to discover the laws of life through our own experience. And if we're willing to recognize that it's not happening to us, it's happening through us, if we're willing to look and listen and observe and learn from, then we have the opportunity to what? To master those things. But if we hang out in this idea that it's unjust that we even have to bother with it, we're not going to get anywhere. So it's an interesting thing to think about freedom. Am I going to spend all of my time just saying, well, you can't tell me that, or they shouldn't tell me that, or they shouldn't do this, or they shouldn't do that, or why can't I, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? Use the law differently. Use the law differently. If someone doesn't understand you, perhaps you could learn how to communicate better. If you have an unmet need, perhaps you could learn how to identify it and then communicate about it. If there's something that's not happening in a way that you inside of you says is right, there are plenty of things to do about that. And we know, because of more of the laws of life, that when we walk into a room and just tear someone to pieces verbally, when we write a nasty letter, have you ever just done that with an email and wished you could somehow retrieve it? When we do things that way, all we do is just add fuel to the fire, we make a bigger mess. So there are other laws of life that are not so physical, but just as predictable that we can use, that have to do with our relationships with other people, that have to do with our desire to make a difference in the world. I got a petition in the mail last week, and I really believed in everything that it was for, and the languaging bugged me. I decided to sign it, regardless of the languaging, and send it off. But I thought, if we keep going at one another saying, I am outraged, what you have done is ridiculous, how dare you, shame on you, are we going to get anywhere? According to my understanding of the laws of life, no. But there's this beautiful thing, the way that it all started, especially, it's especially described by these transcendentalists, is that we each have within us that thing, that place that knows what is right. We have within us that voice of the divine, of the Creator. And we have to get quiet enough and be in the present moment to hear it. It will always tell us what to do next. Who to be, how to be, when. It will always show us and give us everything that we desire and require. Those are some of the qualities of that freedom. Not just to dream, but to count on the fact that everything we need for the fulfillment of that dream will be there. And our job is to be willing to believe that. Our job is to be willing to believe that. So I'd like to close by inviting everyone to hear these words with me. I'm going to share a little bit more from Ernest Holmes before we return to where we started here. He says, we know that prosperity and happiness are the gifts of freedom, and that the divine givingness is the heritage of everyone. The gifts of God are for all. They exist for each person according to his or her capacity to receive them. If you've ever read Holmes, he's always saying, to the degree that, and according to. In this book that Aggie shared from, the class that we're going to do at the end of July, it's called The Law of Correspondence. So to the degree that we understand the conditions of freedom, which say we must discover things for ourselves or we would not be free, and the laws of life, which say that we must experience the consequences of what we are thinking about and focusing on and putting forth, or we wouldn't be individuals. To the degree that we can do that, we avail ourselves of that banquet. We avail ourselves of that bounty. We avail ourselves of that freedom and possibility. So we get to be free. We are. We are experiencing a level of that is so much greater than so many. I invite you to spend some time in gratitude for it. I invite you to spend some time witnessing and blessing everything that has led to this moment. And I invite you to take some time to consider, what does it mean for me to understand the conditions of freedom? What does it mean for me to understand the laws of life? Because now I know that to the degree I do those two things, not only am I free, but I know I am, and all that good is mine. So I invite you to just close your eyes with me. And we'll wrap this up with an affirmative prayer. I speak my word in gratitude for the truth of all life, which is infinite, which is free, which is present, and available to all and in all. I speak my word in grateful recognition of our oneness with it. Knowing that our minds are one with divine mind, that our hearts are one with the heart of all creation, that our bodies and the bodies of our affairs are one with the body of our Creator, that our lives are one with the one life. It is with a grateful heart that I make these statements, recognizing that every time I speak my word in recognition of the truth, I make room for it as my experience and for that of everyone of whom I speak. We are one in mind, we are one in heart, we are one in body, we are one in livingness. And so I give thanks for this. I give thanks for the knowledge of how freedom works, of how life works, and for the gift of both of these. And in that gratitude, I release my word. I know it is already done. And together, as we open our eyes, we say, and so it is.